All right, very good. I did not hear the recording
But I
progress,
but
but
I
it
saw
is.
It's
I
always
It
saw
is.
the smile. I
It
saw
ju-
the smile got pasted on.
yeah,
So
there you go. So it just didn't give the announcement. All right. So whatever happened, we're glad that you could be with us for today's edition of Content Evolution New World. I'm Kevin Clark here on the East Coast, and Mike McGuire is on the West Coast. Mike, good to see you.
Good to see you, Kevin. Nice to see you. Martin, thanks for joining. Looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, it's we have been talking about risk for almost 2 years now, right? And so it's great to have Martin on, talking about risk from your point of view. I would have said the topic today is not the one that we've been discussing. All right. We've been talking about the potential upside of doing risk assessments and potentially finding uh, new sources of insights and revenue and profit. But supply chain has, actually, and risk assessment has become very topical, right? So we're going to talk about it in the current of, current discussions and flow. I'll point out that Martin is with an organization, Implement Consulting Groups, based in Denmark. He is the CEO of the, wholly owned group for Implement North America, and it's been delightful getting him and his team growing here in this region. He's based in Raleigh, and the reason that I got engaged was one of our board advisors, Joe Pine, said, "Hey, I work with these folks. They're great team, and they're coming to your area. Can you give them a hand?" And so it's been a pleasure doing that. Martin, welcome.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for the introduction here. And hi, everybody. It's good to be here. I'm looking forward to a good discussion. And I think being consultants, we of course have prepared a few slides. Kevin, I don't know if you want to, if you can allow me to share that, then I can do that.
You authorization granted. All right. I mean, what would an advisory call be without charts?
Exactly. So let me just now I gotta navigate the
The Microsoft world is the one that you usually are in. So thank
Got
you
it.
for
Well,
joining us
hopefully-
on Zoom.
It's working, Martin. We see it.
It's getting there. All right, cool. So yeah, I just, as you can see here, the topic just says risk management. But as Kevin alluded to before, what's happening in the world is of course a lot of interest in the supply chain area, and we want to zoom in a little bit on that. But we also got some broader reflection. So we're really looking forward to a good discussion. And I have just a few slides here to go through to sort of try and set the scene, and then we can jump into some good conversation around some of these topics here. I've been playing around with risk management as an advisor for the past 20-some years for companies all over the world. That's sort of my topic of background.
I'm going to do some muting, folks, for those of you who are, because I'm getting some background chatter. So just
Thank you.
be aware that I'm making those mute. Okay, I think we're good now. Thank you.
Good.
Go ahead.
One thing very quickly, this is Implement on our page. So we work all over the world basically, and was founded in Denmark just in Copenhagen. And today we got that sort of an 1900 consultants. And I am heading up, as Kevin mentioned, the US or North America side of things, based in Raleigh, North Carolina. So, alrighty. So as you may have seen in the news lately, there's a lot of uncertainty going on in the world. And of course, one of the key things that we see is this economic policy uncertainty. So there's an index that you can follow on that sort of talks to regulation and deregulation and how that impacts uncertainty for decision makers. And this policy index has changed quite a lot rapidly, and you can see here Historically, there was a little bit going on during COVID, where there was a lot of massive changes around the world in how economic policy was formed, shaped, and pushed out. And that's happening now again all over the world, and of course also here in the US. That gives rise to uncertainty for businesses as well. How do they navigate and how do they make decisions in that? And just to give you an example with some of the stuff that's happening right now for businesses, we see there is risk, but there's certainly also opportunities out there. And this is just an example where you can say, well, if everything is not completely the same any longer. So if you have an organization sitting in Europe that sources from China and sells to Canada, there's not really any changes at the moment, and there hasn't been in a long time. There are some tariffs going through that system, but no major changes to that. Whereas if we look for the US organizations that might do sourcing in China and selling in Canada, there's actually quite a lot of changes that needs to be navigated. So how does this then give what are the risks and what are some of the opportunities that's related to this? That's of course a very complex undertaking, and what we see from businesses at the moment is they're asking a lot of questions in what should we do, how should we make decisions, and to zoom in on some of that, we just try to put together a few topics related to uncertainty that businesses they ask us about right now. So we get quite a lot of interest in the broader topic around resilience and adaptability, around scenario planning, so how to think about what's coming down the road, the supply chain resilience that we'll talk a little bit more today about that, and then the forecasting and how do you do that when things are very uncertain, because the whole demand planning and so on is very hard for a lot of organizations at the moment. And then we got a topic that's called confusion of risk management, and then the topic of the day. So it seems like there's a new risk or opportunity that pops up more or less every day that businesses are asking about. What do we do with this? What do we do with that? What do we do? But this is sort of some key topics around the advisory assistance that we see companies are asking for help of today. We just try to put in here something around resilience and adaptability. So what we have seen historically is that organizations have been very focused on optimizing the last dollar and try and get as much profit out as possible. But with an agenda on sort of the changing physical environment with climate change and so on, there's a lot of organizations that are being hit harder right now, and they need to figure out how do they actually design for resilience. So when you design your organization, how do you set that up so through all parts of the organization is more resilient? That's a big discussion, and I think a lot of companies are trying to figure out what does that mean for them. And that can be from resilience from the employee perspective, so psychological safety and all that, to how do you redesign your complete footprint as an organization. So resilience is a very big topic, and it's hard for organizations to tackle that and figure out what to do. So that's one area, as I mentioned. The whole sort of scenario planning is, of course, something that's been around for many years, and I think a lot of you know how to work with scenarios. There's nothing really new in it. I think one of the challenges we are seeing is how to speed up the thinking around scenario planning. That is a challenge. Sometimes they can become very big studies that takes a long time, and companies don't really have time for that anymore. The supply chain resilience related to the other resilience discussion is, of course, a major topic with all the economic policy uncertainty and all the tariffs discussion that's going on globally. How does that impact? What should we do? Should we source from other countries? Can we source from other countries? Should we change our internal supply chain and manufacturing? And where do we put our distribution centers? And how do we pull through from if we had multiple options in our own supply chain? How do we then do it in a smart way and change the way that we pull things through from raw materials, manufacturing, and then all the way into your sort of your customers wherever they are in the world. So this requires a very good coupling between the sort of risk management discipline, finance, and supply chain in organizations, and that's difficult for companies to figure out how to mix that, because ideally you would want to build a model where you could then put in a new tariff number, and then they will tell you what are the best options to work around with that. But to do that, a lot of companies we see, they have a little bit of a data challenge to pull that through. But that's certainly a big topic at the moment. And the challenge with it, of course, is you arrive at an answer, you do an analysis, you arrive at an answer, and then it changes again. So how do you keep up with those changes is a challenge. The forecasting is a major challenge right now, and you can see some of the latest discussions that came out yesterday here in the US about GDP and so on. What happens with the market, and what are the consumers and customers? Where are they? Are they willing to spend money? How does that then impact our whole supply chain as well? So for a lot of companies in various industries, this is a big challenge that they're trying to work with. The last one here on the confusion of risk management is a challenge that we see a lot. So we work a lot with the CEO, CFO of companies or the board, and then into the head of risk management. But the challenge is that you now have many departments or functions in companies that actually work with an element of risk management, but they're not very well coordinated. So when you look at a traditional org chart, you suddenly have many boxes that are dealing with the topic of risk, which they should, but they need to be better at talking together and figure out how do they actually work together and collaborate to come up with good answers for decision making. And that is a big challenge right now. So every time there's a new risk or a new challenge popping up, then organizations are basically building a new department, and that may not be the smartest answer. So that's a specific, very nerdy challenge in the realm of risk management that we see some questions about at the moment. And then, of course, the topic of the day, it changes every week, right? But there's a lot going on where people are asking, what do we do, and how can we work with these different topics? That was quite a lot, but let's just try and zoom in on the supply chain side of things. So what we have seen for companies is a great need, and I think it's just been accelerated. Right? It started, a lot of looks at supply chains happened during COVID. Everybody needed to reject their supply chains. The lessons from that was it needed to be more resilient, but then things started to pick up again, and then everybody sort of forgot. And now it's back as a major topic because of all the tariff discussions. That companies really need to figure out how do we do things differently. And in our view, there are some things that needs to be looked at to really get smarter on the supply chain. And we try to put it into this little picture here, where you on the left-hand side can talk more about the known vulnerabilities that you have in your setup. How can you reject that with thinking more modular, diversify your footprint, and that can be across countries and so on, but it could also be that you start to say that we can't have one factory only producing 90% of our profit. We need to maybe split that into multiple and so on. The supply network, of course, and inventory buffers, vertical integration. Those are some of the topics that companies internally are trying to look at and do different and do better. On the right-hand side is then the topic of risk, of course, but into the sales and operations planning and the sales and operations execution, which are the sort of different timelines that a lot of businesses are looking at when they do their forecasting, right? So what is the 6-month view on our planning effort, and what is the 1-month view on our planning effort, and how do we execute on those? We see a major challenge in companies where sales, finance, and operations they really need to talk more and get in sync on these things, because you have sales going out promising something to customers, and production can't keep up, and finance doesn't know what's going on, right? So you get this a little bit of a challenge in that whole setup. So the sales and operations planning, or for some companies, they work with the concept of integrated business planning. How do you do that better and smarter? That's a very big topic for a lot of organizations now. And how do you then get the right data to support that, and the right system integration to make sure you have one source of truth as you work with these things in bigger organizations. So that's sort of a picture on what's going on, and what some of the businesses that what we are hearing out there, and what they're asking about. And this cuts across industries, right? Because of course now I speak a little bit about manufacturing and so on, but you see this challenge in a lot of different industries at the moment, that they need to think about their combined resilience and also their supply chain. So, and this got us thinking a little bit about today's conversation. And Axel, who's my colleague that's on the call here as well, and we sat down and we thought a little bit about how to challenge ourselves on this, because the speed of change that's happening right now means that we need to be better at figuring out the balance between thinking and acting. And many of you know Daniel Kahneman and the book that you see here, and the thinking that he put into that. And we thought that it could be fun to play around with it a little bit. So hopefully we're not completely butchering Kahneman's great book here and his thinking, but we wanted to add a little bit to it. So we tried to reject the front page here to thinking while acting, fast and slow. So there's something that we see in companies with all this uncertainty. They're caught up in this dilemma between they really need to think and do better analysis to try and understand if they should go left or right. But at the same time, they also have to decide, do we act now or do we wait? And this is a bit of a dilemma, right? So your thinking needs to be fast, but it should also be built on data and so on, right? It can't all just be gut reactions. So with this, we put together, and again, being consultants, we needed a 2x2, right? So we put that together, and we are very curious to hear your thinking about this. But basically, if you put thinking on the y-axis here and acting on the right, on the x-axis here, then we end up with some different quadrants for navigating and deciding how do we actually take on a challenge. If something pops up, where do we put it into this? And we try to give these some names, which the upper left-hand corner is sort of the, you hurry up and wait, right? You hurry up, do a lot of analysis and so on, but you actually don't do anything yet. Then on the upper right-hand corner, we need to do something really fast and we need to take action. So let's just get it roughly right. We don't have time for very deliberate and very big studies. So that was another angle we sort of been look at. The lower right-hand corner is, okay, let's, like Nike said, right, just do it. But be smart about it, right? Learn as you go and iterate on whatever you decided to do. And then the lower left-hand corner, we struggle a little bit with that, and we call it mañana, right? So let's just think about it tomorrow and not today. We're very curious to hear your input on this, whether this works or not. But at least it was trying to help us understand when we look across some of the different major challenges that businesses are seeing themselves in right now, and we just put a few examples in here. What should you be doing with those? You say the regulatory change that you got in the lower left-hand corner that we see a lot of in the banking industry, for example, it is a little bit of a waiting game, right? So, and that can be a deliberate choice, but we also see a lot of banks that wake up a month before the deadline and suddenly they have to do a lot of things because they kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it out there, right? One of the things we've seen with the tariff challenge is there's been a lot of organizations that have moved very fast on the acting side, but then the tariffs changed next week. So there's something there. How do you find the right balance with thinking really fast about what is the potential opportunities or risk to us with this new landscape, but maybe slowing down a little bit on actually implementing changes, right? Because it may change again tomorrow. That depends a little bit on the organization, but it's a fun challenge to see if it sits in the right place there. And then there's some of the other ones. The physical climate risk that you see in the lower part here is has for a very long time been sitting in that lower left-hand corner for a lot of organizations, right? And that's a little bit that boiling frog syndrome, right? And you could argue that actually maybe it should sit in the upper right-hand corner, right? Depending on whether you live near the coast or you live wherever your business you're in and where you are and you live, right? Maybe that's actually. So I think there's different ways of looking at this and moving things around.
Yeah, we've talked about that, Martin, a few times, and we're noticing that that's kind of industry specific at the moment, that we know that the insurers are already moving into the roughly right territory where the people that they're insuring may still be sitting in mañana.
Yes. Yeah. And that could give you a major headache, right? But there's also something about the scale here, right? So yes, a certain company or an industry or whatever, they may do this one way, but maybe for greater humanity, maybe it should sit in a different box, right? Compared to a certain industry. So some of the things that we have worked with companies on to try and do these things is these different sort of topics, right? And I think, as I mentioned before, with this confusion of risk management, there's a lot of topics and challenges that are hitting organizations these days, and they hit them very fast. And they are not very good at figuring out who does what. And if you go back to the normal org chart with the different silos, they are struggling to figure out who really comes up with some good answers or some good choices, and how do we do that in a collaborative manner. So there's nobody that's really sitting at the end of the table in those conversations. So here on the upper left-hand side, we've tried to develop sort of a methodology for what we call deep dive, right? How do you do a very fast-paced analysis that allows you to then do decision making, right? Where you bring the right people in a room, go through a workshop style environment to try and lay out all your different options and all your different assumptions, and then come up with some recommendations in a collaborative manner. As an example, upper right hand corner is that sort of situation room where you bring the right people together, and then you constantly work on a specific challenge. You do your analysis, you make some decisions, and do some actions, right? So some different examples here in how we're trying to help companies that are very generic to the different topics. Kevin, if there's any raised hands or questions, can you help me navigate that? I struggle to see it a little bit on the screen here. Please shout out if there's any comments or questions as we go along.
Absolutely. So are you finished unpacking, or do you want to start to take some questions?
I got one more little thing here.
Okay, so I'm stacking the questions when you're done. Okay, here we go.
Thank you.
Keep finish it up.
Yeah, so just coming back to the topics we had in the beginning and what we see a lot of, we try to say, well, where do they fit into this little model here? And I think that's it's different from company to company how to think about it. But certainly the supply chain and resilience part, or the supply chain resilience at the moment for companies, they sit in that upper right-hand corner. They really need to and want to think about and do something. But they're struggling a little bit how to get it done. Now, the challenge with this little picture here is slightly different, because we got this other dilemma here that what we call the life of a risk, right? So if you as a company, you look into the future, you see something change, that could be an emerging risk or opportunity for your business. But you are not really clear on the timeline of it or the likelihood or what impact it would have to your business, but you are now being made aware that I need to do something, right? And we have a lot of methodologies on scenarios and foresight, and a lot of companies are trying to predict the future, and that's of course difficult, right? But no less interesting anyway. Now, the challenge is something that's out there on the horizon tends to then move in and become foreseeable. Now we can actually start to analyze it. We can look at data. We can do something about it. And that's where we like to see that risk management operates, is on the left-hand side of this diagram here, where you still have uncertainty. Unfortunately, what we see a lot of companies are doing is they end up on the right-hand side of this, and they do problem solving all the time. And if you get into that whack-a-mole sort of situation, then it's very hard to navigate. And that's sort of a part of our idea is when you work with uncertainty and risk, you should do it while they're still uncertain and not when it becomes a problem. So I think that sort of wraps it up, and in some of the observations that we see and some of the challenges that companies are working around in the market at the moment.
Very good. Thank you very much for that, Martin. And would you please introduce your colleague, Alex, because I'm going to add him in. Right, there he is. He helped, right?
Yeah.
I did indeed. Yeah, just quickly, my name is Axel Sedlet, sitting in Implement's Copenhagen office. So I'm 6 hours before some of you on the East Coast, at least. Also working primarily with risk and uncertainty management, together with Martin, of course.
Well, we're delighted to have you with
Thanks.
us. All right, Axel, it's great to have you join us. Now, Martin, few observations before we go into other Q&A. Scenario planning. All right, one of our people who was a founding advisor who has since died, okay, is Napier Collins, who was one of the key people that brought scenario planning into Royal Dutch Shell. And we've started to move away from the standard 2x2 into trilemmas, right? Because the trilemma, is a manifestation of the three body problem, that it's more chaotic, right? When you're looking at three things that are interacting with each other rather than one. And we're beginning to use, artificial intelligence to help us, both understand, to do those trilemma analyses faster, right? So that's something that's happening in our world. So I have a question. You're doing this for companies. So if integrated business planning is the larger frame for this, what is how would either an industry, through their trade association, or, a country, as an aggregation of business interests, use integrated business planning at a larger scale, do you think? Is there a way to apply what's happening at a single company and create opportunity or less risk, or optimize risk, management for, a cluster or a society? That would be on my mind right now.
Yeah. No, I absolutely think that there is, right. You see from the military intelligence side, right? Those communities, they often try to do country risk analysis, right? And publish that for many countries every year. But some countries actually also do a annual country risk assessment that looks much broader than just the security aspects, and includes societal dimensions and so on. The industry perspective, I think there's a lot that can be done from organizations to pull people together and share experiences and knowledge. So we did, beginning of last year, we did a study with the Danish Innovation Fund that was around adaptability related to green transition projects. So we had this hypothesis that a lot of green transition projects or transformation projects, they never get off the ground because they're deemed too risky. It's new technology. We haven't tried it before. We don't know. So they don't cut it in comparing to a normal business case. And we thought that was a little bit of a shame. So we did a study there, and that was with a lot of different companies, and then with the Danish Industry Foundation and then the Innovation Foundation, to try and bring people together, share knowledge, and come up with case studies for inspirations for others, right? And I think that's something that's interesting at that level as well, right? So different dimensions where I think the sharing is caring, right? that we are good at that is really important, right? And but that also requires a little bit back to the thinking and acting slow and fast, right? I think people, they struggle these days to actually read an article, right, in full length.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So how do we then we can create all the content for collaboration and knowledge sharing, but if people are not reading it, then we're back to square one, right? And that's where the collaboration needs to be greater, right? Get back to meet together or whatever, ideate together on things.
Yeah, there's another book on my shelf called The Knowing Doing Gap, right? That was published, and it's like, yeah, we know what to do. And then you ask them a year ago, so how did you do on acting on those things? Oh, well, you didn't do that, right? There's a how do you get the critical attention mapped up to actual resource action, right? To make things happen. It's very interesting. We've got hands, we've got questions, but first I'm going to add in Mike McGuire. Mike, what do you think about what Martin's saying? What I published this morning, by the way, Martin, was about companies and then, scaling up to, larger entities committing brandicide, okay? And that, brand suicide is based on, lack of trust. And these supply chain things are all based on, there's an underlying trust network beyond the transactions, right? That you need to maintain. Mike, what do you think?
Well, a brilliant kind of setup there and discussion, Martin. Thank you. As a former Gartner person, I have a deep and abiding love for the 2x2. So thank you for that. It's interesting. I'm actually dealing with a friend in real time who has a bunch of his manufacturing in China, right? And he's dealing with the fact that he's been operating over there for quite a long time, right? Back in the 80s, 90s, etc. I think the risk if he was here, I think he would say the perceived risk was more what was going to happen domestically in China, as opposed to the opposite. And now, he's beyond the asking questions. He's, he's probably got another 2 weeks. And, that's somebody who's very seasoned in that, working in that world. And to your point, did risk and risk assessment affect his day-to-day work? No. And I'm wondering, to some degree, is this current situation enough to get people to build this practice in, right? Because in many of the companies I dealt with in the past as a, analyst consultant, it seemed like it was once a year, right? A week, once a year. All right, let's have an offsite, play some golf, and we'll talk about what could possibly go wrong. And it's, as you say, it's fragmented in what I see, particularly in marketing where I spent a lot of time, which was in the last 10, 12 years, it was about data and the risk associated using data, et cetera. And it seemed to always struck me that there weren't other voices in the room when those discussions were happening, that point about coordination. How do we incent folks, just no matter the size of their business, to start taking this as more of a regular practice, right? Workout, whatever metaphor you want. I mean, I know that's a big part of what you do, but is it always going to be these kind of big events that get people to pay attention to it for a couple of months and then gone?
Yep.
Okay.
There you go. Questions.
Next question.
No,
Why?
Thanks for the question. I think that you're absolutely right. In most organizations, I've been on this, I want to call it a crusade, right? But for 20 some years, trying to convince organizations to do risk management differently, right? And it's like beating up a pillow, right? Nothing really happens, right? So there is a challenge, and I think that the topic of risk has been misunderstood for many years, right? It came from insurance originally, right? And their risk was actually a thing that you really need to understand and manage well. So if something really went wrong, then you would still be able to recover from it, right? And that's hence you transferred some of your risk to somebody else who would pay you if your ship went down as you were sailing around, right? But what happened is, for a number of years, it got caught up in the audit processes, right? So right now, a lot of risk management is synonymous with an audit-related process where you have to have this very heavy documentation around a lot of things. You use all these risk heat maps and a lot of reporting, and it doesn't really make a difference. So there is a major challenge, and our challenge to that is about integration. Right. So rather than make risk management a function or a discipline that sits outside and you sort of try and stick it onto the organization, you need to integrate the thoughts around it into and building capabilities across the organization around how to think and work with risk, and then integrate it into, for example, if you're doing a monthly business report from a department, it should be in there. It shouldn't be in a separate report, right? And so there's something in that integration journey in how do we get out of this thinking that risk management is done by a department, right? Everybody needs to be a risk manager. And they are, right? They make decisions every day. The challenge is when we make decisions every day, we don't tend to think a lot about tomorrow, right? Because we're preoccupied with the problems of today. And back to that slide I showed before with the emerging and foreseeable, right? How do you find the rhythm and the cadence to continuously think a little bit ahead and make sure that the problems that are coming down the road, you address them as risk, and then you actually start to work with them in a smarter way, right? I think that's part of the challenge here, but that is a major capability lift is needed in organizations, because unfortunately, risk management is not really a topic in most business schools, and people don't really know, right?
Yeah, that's
a
right.
lot about this. Not
Mike,
in this
then
way,
do
anyway.
your follow-up, then we're going to go to Felix,
No,
who was our first commenter.
Let's go to Felix.
Okay, Felix, thanks for giving us our first comments in chat, and then we're going to go over to Mark and Doug. Go ahead.
Okay. Very nice, Mr. Vilsoe. Very, very nice. I'm looking at the work that I do from a risk management, that if my clients are perceptive, it's actually prevention. It's actually being aware of the issues and not being reactionary. But what I find is that
Felix, let Martin know what you do, because he doesn't have context. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm a workplace security consultant that specializes in workplace violence prevention.
Yep.
And the first 10 years of my life, I did a lot of branding and association with the tactical pieces of it. And the last 10 years, I've been working on the strategic piece. And they are suffering from a conflict of interest between performance and measuring metrics versus the dedicated resources that I'm suggesting are needed from a collaborative perspective that seems to be missing within organizations. Managers do not talk to each other about risk unless someone like me comes along and says, I just noticed a risk. What are you going to do about it? And all of a sudden, so my question is, are you finding that to be a similar concern in your work? I know you highlighted it as a bullet. I was just wondering to hear your take for the benefit of the group.
Absolutely. I think if you are to work better and more with the topic of risk, there's a major rebranding exercise that's required, right? Because you mention risk and then all the energy leaves the room, right?
Yes.
Nobody wants to discuss risk, right?
All the
it's
time.
boring and it's negative conversations and so on and so on, right? So from that side, I think you're absolutely right. There's and the challenge, of course, is if you're doing really well in managing risks and being proactive about it, then nothing happens.
Yeah.
Then nothing goes wrong. And how do you measure that? So back into the
Exactly.
old performance management side of things, how do you align your efforts in risk management to that? That's a challenge that needs to be solved as well in many organizations, right? Because otherwise it doesn't get the right attention. A little bit back to what Mike just mentioned as well, right?
I agree. And would you suggest that a good way of maybe counterbalancing that is a low-level exposure to managers on what risk is and what they can do to facilitate, and be aware of how it impacts them? Because I just finished up a week with a client up in New Jersey, and I see these managers once a year, every year for the last 15 years. And I'm in the process now of being tactfully responsible in my write-up of the after action. And culture has impacted these poor people from understanding that the metrics are important, but unless you wrap your arms around people, you'll never be proactive. You'll always be reactive. And these are people in a large plant that collaborate business-wise, but don't do so when it comes to risk mitigation.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, culture eats strategy for lunch, right?
Yes, indeed. I saw it too. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. Thanks for those comments, Felix. Appreciate it. Okay, Mark, your hand is up. Your pen is moving. You're on mute.
Deal with them one at a time. Here we are.
Thank you for that, Martin. Very nice to see you. Do you guys grow out of the Bain tradition in terms of implementation, or I'm not sure where you grow out of, but that's not what I'm trying to say here. Three things struck me about your presentation. That it really is time for the end of the 2x2 because because it doesn't capture enough. And in this particular case, we have thinking and we have acting, but what we ignore is accomplishing. And so what was the results of those thinking and acting that we did? Do we have a measurement that we can compare? We looked in the past, we thought this way, we acted this way. What got accomplished? Anything or nothing? And I'd like to see that broken out much more. I think that it's time. One of the big things that's happened recently, and it's huge, is that we've moved from thinking fast and slow, and I'm a huge fan of Kahneman. That the idea of we have deep analysis and we have heuristics, right? We now have a third way of thinking. We have algorithmic thinking. We have AI. And AI is neither fast thinking nor slow thinking. It's a different kind of thinking. It's a thinking of putting all this stuff together in half a second and it coming out. And I don't think we've taken that into account enough at all. That when Einstein said we can't solve the problems of today with the level of thinking that we have today, he was right, assuming he said that. Nobody knows. But what we went and did, clever humans that we are, is that we invented a new way of thinking. And
Is
so
your question for Martin about how do we apply AI into the space?
yeah, so well, I have three questions in a second. So there's a question of how do we apply algorithmic thinking into our thinking in general, our planning, our whole this kind of stuff. That's a big topic that I saw. And the third topic thing that one of your very first slides was all that volatility. That chart that it neither went up or down, but it got more and more volatile. And it reminded me that 20 years ago, we were talking about VUCA. And the advantage of VUCA is it at least broke some of that out. That what this chart was all mashed together. The variability, the uncertainty, the complexity, the ambiguity, they're all mashed together. So you look at this thing and it goes up and down and you don't know what the fuck to do. Because you haven't differentiated enough the actionable pieces, which you could then apply algorithmic thinking or other kinds of thinking to, which you could then get things accomplished with. And so there's a set of things that we haven't been talking about in the past very much. It's the same language as Royal Dutch Shell and Airy de Goose and all that kind of stuff. What we need to move to a very new way of thinking about all this kind of stuff. And I think you've had an interesting start with what you showed us, but there's still a lot of pieces of it that need to come into the picture before we will have anything like an understanding of what we're trying to do and accomplish and how to do it.
Okay.
Yep.
So Martin, a lot there. Pick something to respond to.
Well, I think that your first point on we can do the thinking and acting, but what actually comes out of it is completely fair, right? And I think we see that in a lot of organizations that they are so focused on deliverables, but we actually need to talk about impact, right? So what is the impact of our efforts, right? Because we can an organization can sit down, do analysis, and come up with a new report on this is our recommended approach for a new footprint. Okay, but what's the impact of that? There's nothing. Right? If that doesn't lead to a discussion, that then leads to a decision, that then leads to a change and an impact, right? And that's what we should drive at. And when we work, we often work with what we call impact cases. So instead of a business case, we do an impact case. So what is the end game that we're after in the analysis that we're trying to do, right? What should that enable? And then let's start measuring whether we are going to get to that impact or not. And I think that's really, really important, especially in the industry that I'm in, where, you know, consulting is often very good at creating 300 PowerPoint slides, but doesn't lead to anything, right? And we need to get around that and actually help move things forward to some sort of impact, right? So I think that's the first part that's really important, right? The other one around AI, completely agree that gives us a whole new set of tools, and I think there was a question in the comments as well, right, around using that to speed things up, which is completely fair, right? And we're dabbling into all of that as well, right? But there's a lot more to uncover on that in that aspect, right? How do we do it in a smart way? And I think one of the challenges we see in companies in how you utilize AI into, for example, business planning, forecasting, and so on, it's challenging because the data is simply not good enough, right? So there's a huge backlog of data issues for a lot of companies that we need to resolve, and maybe get AI to resolve that one as well, right? But that's a challenge.
Thank you. And thanks for those questions and that backgrounder, Mark. Greatly appreciate it. Doug, come on in, my friend.
Yeah, great presentation. My background's worked at Motorola and Nokia for 33 years, account management, but go-to-market strategies. I had a focus on GS1 supply chain, looking at how the challenges of supply chain. Right, COVID really gave us challenges of supply chain, and now with what's going on with the Trump administration, supply chain is taking a lot of there's a lot of chaos, right, in supply chain. So I guess one question to you is, and you kind of talked a little bit about this, is how well do people understand their supply chain and can say, okay, and do the what if scenarios? Like if the tariffs change, if they don't change, so how do I, what's the headwinds, what's the tailwinds? Because the last thing you want to do is in all this chaotic environment to make a bad decision, right? Maybe the best decision is to wait to see what tomorrow will bring, right? But how do you plan ahead to be resilient, right? Like, what should I be doing in case something really bad happens, and what should I be doing in case the Trump decides to change everything and go back to normal, right? And how do I maximize my business today, 1 month from now, 1 year from now, 10 years from now, given that there's so many chaotic environments going on?
Yeah. So I think that one challenge is, as you alluded to in the beginning, Doug, is this whole thing about how well do you actually know your supply chain, right? And I think that there's a very widespread field on that one, right? Some know it pretty well, and some basically don't know, right? They're just sourcing something and buying something from somebody, right? And you even see companies that know their supply chain pretty well. They may know it to tier 1, tier 2, but they don't understand the underlying tier 3 level, right? So you got that challenge as well, and suddenly what you thought was a very diverse supply chain, it comes back together at the tier 3 level, right? And that then gives you a continuous challenge, right? So there's something there, and I think that the analysis part, and actually back to the AI question on that one, how do you start to work better with this and start figuring out, well, how does that tier 1, 2, 3, whatever you're looking at, how does it actually come together? Can you do some sort of pattern analysis or system analysis on those setups, right? Because if you have, I just worked with a client yesterday, they have 3,000 suppliers, right? And it's just very hard to in tier 1, right? It's very hard for a human to sit down and look through that and see where are the vulnerabilities in that setup, right? So the traditional analysis where you go through and look at the criticality of either the supplies or components or whatever you're doing, what level you're going after, right? It takes time, and hopefully there's a smarter way that we can start to do that by applying AI, right? And that's one of the things that we're looking a lot at when we look at the supply chain resilience, is how do we plug that in to then do those sort of system and pattern recognition to then come up with a diversification strategy if that's what's needed, right? But it's certainly a big challenge, but I think as companies get better on the data side, it also enables us to do this much, much smarter going forward, right?
All right, very good. Doug, always, adding value to our conversations. Ben, you've been putting some thoughtful stuff into chat. Come on in.
Hi,
Metaphysical,
Martin.
thoughtful stuff.
Yeah, I I hope there've been useful bon mots and thoughts along the way. But I come back to an issue as we start the evolution of practices, and this group has heard me many times before say that our frequent challenge is that we're trying to fix the 20th century, and yet we're a quarter of the way into the 21st century. And so I start with some of the challenges on just the terminology of risk and the perception of pejorative risk, and any discontinuity signals risk. And you say, yeah, but it also signals opportunity as well. But we start with a bias on it, perception that I think is negative, instead of seeking a true situation awareness and situation condition assessment that that is a part of it. What I want to know are what weak signals, when amplified, inform my future. And I don't want to assume or classify them as risk or begin by doing so. And I think to Mark's point also, that our approach to handling of risk, of prevention, detection, mitigation, and we'll build these cycles that are very comfortable for humans and humanity. But when we start bringing in new engines, new cognitive engines, we we have an opportunity to rethink that as well, and looking at continuous assessment, not episodic assessment. And audit, as we know, is already starting to move from episodic assessment into continuous assessment. So I've thrown a lot of comments, Martin. I hope that it informs the discussion as well. But that's a challenge that I see. That we're still somewhat trying to fix the human age model, and actually nature often better informs our dealing with issues and problems than industrial age practice.
I was going to say, Ben, you're offering a organism point of view, all right, that the companies in aggregate would be better to understand them as a living organism, right? And which is what we're doing with healthcare, is we're moving from episodic diagnostics to continuous telemetry, with new devices, and IoT is going to, provide that for a lot of businesses, right? Both in terms of the data it throws off and some physical things that weren't being monitored before. What do you think, Martin?
I reflect on Miller's book on living systems and other things like that inform that.
Martin, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a lot, and I completely agree that the challenge of risk, as we talked about before, is that it's the thinking around it. And if you look at ISO 31000 as a guideline for risk management, it is so outdated already, right?
Yeah, that's
what
right.
we're talking about here is light years ahead of anything you see the big 40 companies or the standards and so on are working on, right? And I think that there is a massive opportunity to really fast track some of this thinking. I wonder a little bit about how do we take these deliberations and then morph them into an organization, right? So as I said before, is that an integration journey where we try and teach everybody in the organization how to navigate and do this kind of thinking? Or is it back to that we create a modern risk management department that works differently with all these concepts? Or how do we really get it into an organization so it can be utilized in a smart way, right? Because if it just becomes the heroic risk manager, one person that sits in a massive company, it's not going to get us anywhere anyway, right?
Yeah, by the way, by the time it becomes an ISO standard, you could no longer consider that to be a competitive advantage, right? Because everybody knows it, and you probably need to be compliant with it, or you don't get to play anymore, right? So you're looking for what are we doing that nobody else is doing that would allow us to treat risk differently? Robin, AKA Zoom user, come on in.
I've got to update that. Sorry. Martin and your colleague, thank you very much for this presentation. My background includes doing some work on an old CIA project called Urban Flashpoints back around 9/11. And I've done some teaching in the big data and quantitative research and analysis space. And I'm currently helping with intelligence education imperatives for the US intelligence community and beyond, so all of its allied countries. My quick question around supply chain and risk. I look at how data science has matured, AI and social media and even quantum or compute power has increased, such that the Intel process has gone from what was classically a 2-week process, where you could refer to your own diplomats and your opponent's diplomats and some neutrals. Now it's 2 seconds. And so we've got a bit of a wicked problem solution situation there. The Intel cycle shortened. It shortens the opportunity for oversight, governance, and ethics, and increases the chance or risk of failure, after which we have a loss of trust, potential loss of trust. And I just wanted to hear from you any thoughts in the last 60 seconds we have on supply chain risk and the Intel cycle shortening.
Yeah, so I guess the part of the challenge is the how do you go from intel gathering to decision making, right? Because if you need to stop and think in between, right, then how do we do that process smarter, right? And I'm a little bit concerned right now that a lot of what we see of output is it is comparatively sort of intel based, but how does that help us inform what are the 5 best options we got, right? And there is a little bit of a leap from one to the other, right? And I think it's getting better day by day, right? But how to do that, and how do you then allow organizations because what we see a lot of in companies is that nobody has time to think, right? And that think does not mean a 3 weeks project, right? But people are just going from Zoom or in Teams meeting to Teams meeting to Teams meeting, right? And what is how do you actually compute all the stuff that comes at you, right? And I think there's an advantage in having a lot of it being condensed by utilizing all these new tools. But there's still something in there. How do we allow ourselves the freedom and the time to then think about the choices we make, right?
Yeah, what you folks are discussing is of critical importance to policymakers, military folks, intelligence folks. Yeah, thank you for your work.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you for those thoughts and moving us at the end here into that space. Greatly appreciate it. Axel, thank you for joining us. You see that we have a primarily, right, although there are some international people who join us from time to time, a primarily North American group here. What do we need to be thinking about, since you're sitting in Denmark, all right, what do we need to be thinking about that you don't think that we're thinking about right now? And I know that Martin tries to convey as much of that as possible, but we'd appreciate your thoughts as we wind up here.
Oh, wow. Yes. I just want to
small
start off by
ask,
saying,
huh?
yeah, small ask. Yeah. No, but thank you for a great session. I just wanted to start out about that. A lot of great insights and a lot of good considerations that we'll, of course, take back with us when trying to develop this 2x2 into something else. But no, it's a super interesting question. What should we think about in this forum, then, I assume, that we're not thinking about currently? I think so. The AI question is a hot topic for everyone, and a lot of clients ask us about it. One thing that I think so it's a great ambition to integrate AI into essentially everything that we do. What we see, however, is that organizations aren't even ready to start implementing chatbots, essentially. So even though the technology is available, it might not be easily implemented, right? And that takes a lot of coordination. It takes a lot of subject matter expertise that is across the organization and oftentimes outside of the organization. So it's a huge exercise to actually pull that all together. Because I don't necessarily think that we're there yet and ready to start using all of this new technology, even though I do think it's super valuable and something that we should use.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll bend your ear and tell you about the AI readiness collab approach, which is, small teams rapid prototyping their way into, use cases as opposed to it monolithically appearing in the organization. Mike can tell you all about that, right?
Yes, I can.
I'll reach out.
In another session.
That's right.
Hit my
So,
Calendly.
let me just say, thank you, Martin. Thank you, Axel. Mike, you have the last word.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you, Kevin, for that. And again, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining. Everybody for joining. It's a great conversation. I think if we can do anything in the coming months to Kevin, to kind of follow up on your question, is how do we start building little frameworks that can be easily digestible by small teams and large teams in terms of building it, or this as a regular practice. And I think, to Axel's point, the use of AI in that can be extraordinarily helpful as long as it doesn't become the only tool in the toolbox. But I would think that could be an interesting challenge for us to continue to kind of occasionally address, like, how do we find examples that allow people to start the permission to start asking within their organizations to expand this notion of who gets to be involved in risk management.
All right. Well, in everything you do, be intentional. Thanks again for being part of this episode. We'll talk again soon. Cheers.
For having us. Cheers.
Thanks. Bye-bye.